All right, everybody, you are back. It is the Jack Murphy Live Show, and I am Jack Murphy, and I am all over the internet at Jack Murphy Live. Find me on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live, the website, jackmurphylive.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is at Jack Murphy Live. Of course, today I have a repeat guest. I think, John, you've been on the podcast more than anybody else.
Oh, wow.
And that's because you know what's going on, man, and you have been predicting the future every single step of the way. Guys, this is John Robb. If you haven't listened to our earlier podcast, please go check them out, starting with number 11, I believe. And also check out his Patreon, John Robb, and his website, Global Gorillas. John is an analyst who focuses on the intersection of war, technology, and politics. Interestingly enough, that is where our world is coming together, right on that key structure right now. And John, every time we get together, we talk a little bit about the past and a little bit about the present and a little bit about the future. And so today I want to start off. Of course, we're going to get to January 6th. Of course, we're going to get to GameStop. We're going to talk about the future, but I just want to back up maybe a little bit and just give people a context that all this stuff is happening in right now. Sort of networks and the political environment and the evolution that you've been documenting from political networks to tribal networks. And, let's just get a flavor of where we are before we start talking about the details of January 6th and the corporate techno tyranny that's about ready to blanket the earth for all eternity. Just kidding. We're going to try to stop that. But John, let's get everybody up to speed. What was the circumstances from your perspective leading up to January 6th that sort of have provided the backstop and the context for what happened and what we're about to talk about here?
Oh, wow.
I know that's quite a bit. But let's talk about sort of just the emergent political networks, the emergent political tribes, the alliances, and how they've arranged themselves and sort of set the scenario in that way.
Okay. No, I mean,
it's a big question, I guess.
Yeah. I think I'm getting a little echo, but
okay, go for it.
Unfortunately, right? The overarching drivers on this is that, the nation state, as we knew it, came out of the treaties of Westphalia, got large, we battled over during the 20th century for which nation state system was dominant. And the nation state is being hollowed out by globalization and the internet. It's getting weaker, and it's less capable of getting anything done. It's losing control of its economy, its control over the media narrative, its cohesion is in decline. And that's kind of the overarching decline that we're seeing. Every year it gets a little worse, living in countries around the world. Another one is that the policy establishment, the kind of expert class that runs the United States, has had a series of spectacular failures. They were seeing them, one after another. WMDs going into Iraq, the idea that unrestricted trade with China would democratize China, bring them into the community of nations. The idea that there's nobody to blame or there weren't any real causes of the financial crisis. So, no one ended up going to jail for that, despite the, mountains of fraud involved. And most recently, this whole thing with COVID, where, if you say anything different, people will be looking at your stuff and trying to disconnect you.
The general sense here is this is like a post-Westphalian environment where the nation state is losing its control. It's losing the allegiance of its people. And those allegiances are going elsewhere, right? They're going to causes, they're going to gangs and tribes and corporations and issues. And then they're able to coalesce around ideas, right, around the plausible promise. And I think that's something we're going to talk about a little bit today, right? The plausible promise. John, could you just define that for us real quick?
Yeah, the plausible promise is a way to get an open source network where there's many different players, each with their own motivation for joining in, to come together, to act as one. And we saw that in the Iraqi insurgency, and we saw that in the big protests in North Africa. Get rid of Mubarak. That kept all these disparate groups together. and they were able to do that. And more recently, we saw that again with in Puerto Rico, where they got rid of the governor there. If you talk to any one person in the crowd, they had their own complex motivations for being there, but they could all agree on that one thing. That was the plausible promise. One of the keys to that is that it's a promise of a goal that they could all agree on. It also has to demonstrate plausibility, that it actually has to be demonstrated, and that it works. And like in a case of a protest, you actually have to be able to go out onto the street and not get suppressed. You have to mobilize at least a minimum amount of support for your idea.
Just to interject here, I mean, the MAGA phenomenon as we came into 2015 and 2016 was an emergent phenomenon. There was an emergent network of people who coalesced around the idea that Donald Trump could get elected, right? They had had enough of the corporate uniparty. They had had enough of the status quo. They wanted change, whether or not they even wanted all of Trump's policies. At the very least, most everybody wanted to see him be like a weapon unleashed upon the establishment. And the plausible promise there was like, hey, it looks like we can get him there. The plausible promise started, I guess, just in the polls and in the primaries, and before you know it, like the whole MAGA network came together and exploded into action to lift Trump to victory. And at the same time, there were other networks emerging and coalescing around their plausible promise, which was get rid of Trump, get rid of Trump. So we saw the resistance form, and who made up the resistance. And then we're going to talk about how that network exists, and later in the show, like what we can do to disrupt it potentially. But what does the opposition network look like?
Oh wow. Well, the resistance as we knew it is pretty much done. I mean, it's broken into component networks. The problem with an open source network, an open source movement, is that it usually, when it achieves its plausible promise, it dissolves. So when you have the protest Mubarak's ousted, the network dissolves and everyone's at each other's throats again. In the case of Trump, there was a way around that. As long as he continued to disrupt, as long as he continued to be a weapon, he continued to get support. And his support was pretty much even at 42% throughout his entire presidency. On the left, or left-right doesn't mean as much as it used to. I mean, it's a different left-right now. The resistance has fragmented into something else. And they found a different way of maintaining cohesion over time. They created what I call network tribes. These tribes are like the anti-racist tribe, the anti-fascist tribe, the anti-colonialist tribe, and they have created a pattern of activity, a pattern of behavior, a pattern of language of their enemy. And that definition of the enemy has allowed them to come together and act as one. That persists over time. This pattern is curated by millions of people who are constantly finding examples out there in the world and then posting it. Often these examples have kind of emotional content that creates an empathic connection. I call them empathy triggers. Like a George Floyd video when that goes out, it triggers empathy. Empathy isn't what we normally associate with empathy based on the kind of pop psychology definition. It's actually a pre-verbal form of communication that was critical to tribalism and creating cohesion. When you hear the story from a great hunter coming back from the hunt, and when they tell that story, you take their mindset when they were facing down that prey or facing down that predator, and you put it inside your own head. You grimace, you tighten your fist, you feel virtually the same thing as that hunter felt. And that kind of transference is a lot of information. You get the framework and you fill in the blanks using your own experience. And you become one with that person. It creates a kind of a narrative and a tribal cohesion that creates a fictive kinship that bonds you. And we've seen that at work online. It really works well online. That when you get angry at the police, in the case of the George Floyd video, you get angry and you have complete empathy for George and you have zero negative for the policeman. That helps bind people together. creates that fictive
this
kinship.
sounds a little scarier to me than a political party, right? A political party, people come together because they have an idea of what politics should be. It
Right.
seems like maybe an intellectual exercise, debate around taxes, foreign policy, should we do this, Green New Deal, whatever the case may be. But when you start talking about people sorting around empathetic triggers in a pre-verbal way, using your limbic system and your old school interpretation system, which by the way is found in all animals basically, and had gotten us to the point of evolution where we were succeeding, and then of course we had the brain development. But like, it's a powerful system is what I'm trying
Right.
to say. And you can feel it today, right? If you have a sense emanating from your palms or your stomach or your heart or the hair on the back of your neck or sweat or something like that, that's your pre-verbal perceptive system, like talking to you, giving you a signal. And so when we're talking about now this fusion of technology, memes, empathy triggers, and tapping into the fictive kinship circuitry that we have, right? The fictive kinship, for people that don't know, is that humans evolved around imagined order, shared stories that we had inside of our head that aren't actual real things, but they're just in our brains. They're stories, they're narratives, and they sorted us. And we coalesced around these ideas, and so that's like built into us, like wanting and needing to coalesce around these fictive kinship or imagined orders. And so now what we're talking about is a combination of technology, memes, empathetic triggers, hacking into this system of fictive kinship that we use to organize ourselves throughout history. It's a very powerful combination. It feels stickier to me than political differences. What do you think about that? Is that an accurate statement?
Oh, most definitely. There isn't just an opposition that you disagree with; it's an enemy that you extend zero empathy to. So anything that happens to them is that's negative or that's even dire is acceptable. This kind of tribal formation was expanded into a vacuum. The kind of national narratives that we had that created kind of patriotism, the kind of tribalism that we had cohered with in the past has been in decline. It's been under attack, and these new tribal narratives have emerged and kind of taken up the slack, and people have transferred their loyalty from the country to these tribes, and their narratives are more important.
It's not a conscious decision either, right? It's just something that kind of happens, right?
Most definitely.
It's involuntary. So to me, it feels like people are being captured, right? Like we live in a narrative war space. Everybody's been conscripted. Marshall McLuhan taught us. You have taught us, and Lind has taught us, and fourth generation warfare has taught us that everybody is on the battlefield, and we've all been conscripted, and we're involved whether we want to or not. And this control, it's like mind control. Am I getting this right? It feels like mind control. If someone can shape your worldview and induce you to behaviors and actions through narrative messaging, through mimetic triggers and empathetic triggers, how conscious is this process? It's subconscious.
Oh, wow. Combination of the two. I mean, one thing about going online, and McLuhan pointed this out probably earliest back in the 60s, is that we're being rewired for this new world. Slowly at first with TV and radio, and then now it's like accelerated. And so instead of kind of the literary mindset where you find a book or find an article and you sit back and you read it and you form your own opinion inside yourself and then you present it and argue it, we're into this fast flow of information that kind of washes over us, and we can't do the same thing that we did previously. So what we do is we pattern match. We pick bits and pieces of information out of that flow and then put it into a pattern to make sense of it. And usually those patterns are built by other people or built in conjunction with other people. And these tribal patterns, you are one of millions that are working on curating these patterns, and they help you make sense of all the information that you're confronted with. So everything is spun, everything is turned into a puzzle piece for these tribal patterns. So it's deeper than just saying, okay, I am consciously connected to a country or to a organization, your entire sense-making apparatus, everything that you use to make sense of the world, is tied up in these tribal structures. You can't see it unless you can't deal with the world unless you have these a loyalty to these tribal structures. So that means, like, for instance, when you see somebody claim something and it proves out to be wrong in the next day, there's no way to refute it. There's no way to come back with a correction, because once that claim has been fitted into the tribal pattern, nobody will reverse it. No one will take it out, because then they would have to kind of question the whole tribal pattern. Their whole sense-making apparatus has had to be put into question. They won't do it. So fake claims are really, really powerful in this environment. You can make the claim and then it kind of goes out and gets accepted. There's one of the things that makes this really kind of dangerous is a lot of the stuff we saw on the right and on the left it uses a conspiracy dynamic. And then the conspiracy dynamic that went into QAnon formation and what happened in the Capitol event is mirrored on the left with these tribal structures, because they see a conspiracy at work with white supremacy and colonialism and fascism. They see it, misogyny or the patriarchy. There's a conspiracy out there that's actually attacking them. But the problem is that the establishment is only suppressing one of the conspiracy frameworks and not the other, and they let there's a bias at work that makes it impossible to unravel.
It's very interesting to me to see how we become ego invested in our own reactions, right? So what we're talking about is an empathetic reaction, an involuntary response to an image or a video that we're presented with. And then we have an empathetic reaction, which is involuntary pre-language, as we've said. And yet we become ego invested in this.
Right. Yep.
To the point where even when the facts are held up directly to your face that show it's exactly contrary to what you believe, you still don't believe it. You still can't believe it.
Oh yeah, I mean that you get that empathy trigger. It says basically to you, connect, and you connect at a deep level, and then it's connected to a pattern that says, see this example proves this pattern is correct all the way out. Every little claim that's ever been made on this pattern is proven here in this one example. And if that example turns out wrong, you're not going to withdraw it. You're not, people would come back typically and say, well, it should have been right, or it's mostly right anyway because of this. This is happening everywhere, and I don't really believe you when you say that it's wrong or it's been disproven. They must be lying, right? And you hear that all the time. It's nuts.
Right. It must be fake. It must be fake. These facts must be fake. The publication must be lying. That person standing there in front of me doesn't really exist. People's histories and track records become irrelevant. The meanings of words change to suit your ego invested interpretation of a meme that you saw. We've talked about this pattern recognition. It's part of us, right? Pattern recognition is part of the way that we've evolved, and we evolve in an environment that has so much data that it's impossible for us to process, right? And in fact, like, our tools of perception are designed to keep data out rather than as much to keep data in. There's so much information, and since there's so much seeming chaos around us, and we want to feel settled, right? Nobody likes to feel unsettled or chaotic or floating on the ocean at night. I'm thinking about Moby Dick here. He was onto it. He understood the feeling of chaos and being unmoored. Herman Melville, that is. But I find myself questioning whether or not all I'm doing is going around pattern matching, right? Like, just going around and looking for evidence to fit the pattern that I feel like I've come to understand as my own, obviously authentic, well thought out, well considered, well researched, well critiqued position. But then I feel it, man. A tweet comes through and you're like, oh yeah, that one fits the pattern all together. Like, and you get all hyped up and you're like, we're on this one. And you can feel that energy in the social media space when something like that happens, when there is a confirmation. Interesting thing that just happened, and we're going to jump ahead just a smidge before we go back to January 6th. This AOC video that just came out a couple weeks ago or whenever it was, this too, a tremendous example of the empathetic triggers, about not needing to be right, just about sending out the right feeling to people. Did you observe, did you watch this video, and did you observe what happened around it and people's reactions? Is this an empathetic trigger on the level of George Floyd? I mean, the whole event around January 6th kind of was itself too, huh?
Oh yeah, but it's not at George Floyd level, but it was an empathy trigger, and it did uh, do the job. I mean, when she was describing how she was in the bathroom and she was up against the wall with her hands on the wall, behind her, and hiding, and could hear somebody say, "Where is she? Where is she?" You felt that. You felt kind of involuntarily angry that she would, had to go through that. I mean, whether I'm not predisposed to be completely against her all the time. It's just, I was triggered to a certain extent. I could see how that could work. And then, to a large extent, it was manufactured, obviously, because, that was a policeman saying, "Where is she?" Capitol Police. And she wasn't under direct threat. But it really doesn't matter to the people who were actually, triggered by this. This was as real as, the hand in front of their face. It's like, this is like as real truth as you can get. And they didn't want that kind of diminished or tarnished by people pointing out, that she really wasn't under direct threat. Yeah, it was a good example of it. It, mobilized people to be angry, at the Capitol event, at the Capitol riot, and see it as a existential threat to everybody, that they're at risk of being murdered by the hands of this kind of riotous mob, and yeah, it's effective in doing that.
Yeah. What strikes me about these examples is that the first one wins. The first image, the first meme, the first narrative generally wins. If you're predisposed to like this particular empathy trigger or this pattern matching, system, the first thing that comes to you takes the spot, and it becomes very difficult to dislodge. And I think that the folks that want to control the message and control the narratives, they know this. So speed becomes almost more important than accuracy in this environment. And even adapting and reiterating and acting again seems to be a skill with higher value today than accuracy. What do you think about that, between the power between speed and accuracy today? Which is more powerful?
Well, speed is, but I mean, in the case of AOC's video, it was after the fact. She saw the kind of anger at the Capitol event diminishing, and she found a way of, goosing it, getting it back up to the levels that she thought were appropriate. So it really wasn't speed; it was, very targeted. She knows what she's doing, and when she was putting that together, but she was telling a narrative that she thought was true to her.
Well,
So
it's speed in the sense that she was observing the environment maybe shifting, or she was observing the
right,
environment, maybe a crack in there, or she knew that she needed to come back out with something, come back out with some more messaging after the fact to re-emphasize what went down. And I think at the same time also provide cover. Like, I wonder how often there's coordination between an event like AOC, her video, and then government action at the same time. I know we've discussed in the past that Trump used to do what you would describe as a fast transient. It's all right. The dogs are here. The dogs are here. Rosie's going to bark too when the mailman comes in just a little bit. No worries, guys. The speed. What was I talking about? The speed at which people. She was observing that the narrative was shifting, so she had to react, and she had to put some more information out there. Fast transients. I got it. So Trump used to. Yeah, John's got to take a quick step out to handle that. We're going to talk about fast transients for a second. So Donald Trump used to do these things where he would just point people in a different direction, right? Where he would tweet something out that was on a different subject that would trigger people in the same way that we're talking about with John here. And at the same time, he would use that as a distraction for what they were doing in the government and the policies that they were implementing. And I wondered And I talked about this on Tim Pool the other night. I wondered about that with the AOC event, and if that video was intentionally distributed at that time as a way to distract everyone, distract the opposition, to get us all triggered and outraged and researching where she was at the time and what room that she was in so that we could fight that narrative. While at the same time, you got the Biden administration issuing executive orders, shutting down pipelines, allowing transgender girls, boys, whatever, people who are born men to compete against women in sports, changing immigration policies, going back to catch and release and all kinds of things that she served as a distraction, because I think that is a way to put down some cover fire for people for the government to take actions. And I wonder if there's coordination there. John is taking a quick stop because something happened at his house. This is what happens with live podcasts and interviews. So I'm just going to keep pressing on a little bit. And the environment that we see right now, it used to be, here's John. It used to be the corporations. It used to be the the resistance, the corporations, the Uniparty, Antifa, and Black Lives Matter all sort of in an alliance together, especially from 2017 through the election. And their plausible promise was at once to diminish the power of the federal government, I believe, and then also just to get Trump out of office. And so now, after Trump has been removed from office and Biden has been elected, I think we're seeing cracks in that network. Their plausible promise seems to have dissipated, and their alignment seems to have dissipated. And we can see evidence of that, I think, in Antifa acting sort of outside of what seemed to be alliance with that sort of corporate resistance Uniparty network that was in opposition to Trump. John, are you seeing the network? That network of coalesced around the idea of anti-Trump. Are you seeing it being durable? Are you seeing it crack? I know we talked about Antifa just now, but what about the corporations? What about Black Lives Matter and the race people? What about the blue church and the establishment and the institutions and such? Are they all still on the same page?
Well, we saw the resistance break into its component tribes. And you have the anti-racist tribe, the anti-colonialist tribe, you have the anti-fascist tribe, and the anti-fascists are off kind of going in their own direction. They're still a little bit more aggressive, and they started to get targeted as a result. But one of the kind of things that came out of this is that we saw, 2-3 years ago, that the government was kind of outsourcing domestic stability and, control of the messaging in the society to corporations, to the big tech companies, and that has accelerated. That these companies are accruing incredible amounts of money, and they've started to take over everything having to do with the public sphere. We saw that. I don't know if you want to jump into the kind of the disconnections that happened, but.
I'm interested in this phrase that you just used. And John, can you just rejiggle your audio system there? Just maybe plug it back in again. I'm interested to discuss the breakdown, but you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting there, which was outsourced domestic tranquility. What does that mean?
Yeah, in counterinsurgency operations, you often have stabilization operations, and you try to stabilize the political environment, and you stabilize society, and you take efforts to do that. There's lots of different things that you do in order to maintain that stability. That was kind of pushed onto the big companies, and you saw people like Zuckerberg and Jack and others sitting there going, well, they're asking us to do this, and we don't want to do it, but we're kind of doing it anyway. And they kind of that's always the excuse of any tyrant, right? They're kind of forced into it. It really came to a head in January after the Capitol event. That was used as an excuse to radically accelerate and radically expand corporate control over society, over politics. And in essence, they took over the political system in the U.S. And it's
let's just pause there for 1 second.
Right.
The corporations taken over the political system in the United States. It's a pretty heavy statement. Yeah. And I remember growing up, and I remember there's always been people complaining about corporations, corporate power, etc. But this is different, right? This is different. This isn't complaining about corporations in the 80s and 90s. This is a completely different environment. They have so much more power, and they are relatively unchecked. Right. And they're now actually moving into curtailing human rights, and they're actually sort of creating a alternate constitution in some ways, right? I've seen you say terms of service are more important than the Constitution today. What does that mean?
Oh, well, what the corporations provide the party in power the ability to do is to restrict communications and restrict behavior in a way they couldn't do it through any kind of legal means. It's a route around. They're able to exercise power and do things that could never pass Congress. I mean, everything from disconnecting Trump, which was purportedly the most powerful person in the world, a seated U.S. president. I mean, disconnecting him from the most powerful and widespread platforms, communication platforms, unilaterally without any repercussion. It was just amazing. And then, that basically said to the world, nobody is above us. That's why Merkel and others started getting worried, because basically, these platforms have taken over and said there isn't a powerful enough politician in the world to overrule us. We can take you down. And then they started. They went after Parler, and when they disconnected Parler, Amazon Web Services disconnected them. They said there's no alternative but us, right? There's nobody else but us, and you can't build a technology alternative, and that could potentially be used against stuff like Bitcoin and others in the future. And then there's this cascade, right? Once the big guys go, it's just not the big communications platforms, the big social networks. They create a cascade of disconnection across all of the online services and then offline services. So the Parler CEO goes, wait, we lost our text provider, we lost our email provider, even lost my lawyer. I mean, everybody disconnected all at once within 24 hours. So you basically become unpersoned. So that the threat to you as an individual, no matter who you are, is that if you push against this, you don't follow their rules or their arbitrary kind of interpretation of their rules, you will be unpersoned. You'll disappear from monolife.
You nailed it there when you said the arbitrary application of their rules, because it's obvious that we've seen that the application of the rules has been focused on the folks on the right of center for sure. I just saw a network visualization that showed that sort of left and right universes. I think you retweeted it also. There were three colors on this visualization. They were red, blue, and black. And black represented all of the accounts that had been disabled and the broken connections. And you could see that there was the red sphere, and then there's a whole hemisphere of it just black now. And they've been doing it systematically over the last 4 years. A couple of comments on what you just said there. First off, Parler, what a clown show. How the hell were they hosting on Amazon? Clown show, just not even thinking about the future, no one advising them, obviously, on the real circumstances that they found themselves in. If they really, truly were trying to operate as an upstart, sort of insurgent social media force that was an alternative, then why were they hosted on the same damn thing everybody else is hosted on, freaking Amazon? I don't understand that.
It's inexpensive and allows you to scale fast. Right? It's so much less expensive. If you go to the big cloud services, you can scale your stuff on the cheap. You can make money by doing it. If you have to host it yourself, I mean, I built a data center before, and it is a pain. It's terrible. It's expensive and it's difficult. And cloud services are so much easier. I mean, that's the bind here. Is if you want to be big and if you want to have reach, and you want to have millions of people using your stuff, you need to be on these big services. I'm sorry.
It's no problem. It's no problem. We have the same issue here with Rosie as well. You have to be on the big services, but if you're thinking long term, if you're thinking strategically, then you got to be smarter about that. And that's what tells me that Parler was a clown show from the jump. I had personal interactions with them. My first day on Parler, I got banned because I was questioning their terms of service, and I was trying to figure out like how they were really operating. And I tweeted, I went onto Parler, I posted some questions about the terms of service, and within a few hours they had deleted my individual posts on Parler. What they call them, parlays or something. They deleted them, and you could see right in there it just said deleted by admin. And I reached out. I contacted the CEO. I made a stink about it on Twitter. I ended up talking to the CEO of Parler on the phone, and I interviewed him. And it was clear that they just didn't know sort of what they were doing or what the real environment they were operating in was. Because had they really known, they would not have ever allowed themselves to be that vulnerable, I believe. And then something else that you said earlier too now is about this cascade. The cascade is that I know it's like we want to make sure we're on the same team. We want to make sure we still have access to Amazon. We want to make sure that everybody still sees us as a good guy. So they respond to the leadership of the biggest guys, of Amazon, of Google, of Twitter, shutting down Parler and Trump. And so they react like that. This is an example of an emergent phenomenon, John, or is this potentially an example of the top-down directive saying time for everybody to get on board and disconnect right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors. It has the kind of behavior that you get when you're raising. Ever raise a lot of money? I've raised like 50 million before on different ventures, and it's always tough to get that first investor, the lead investor. You get that one that has some kind of stature, and you get them to go, and they put the first 5 million in, and all the rest are easy. Everyone else says, okay, I'm in. And it's the same thing with these big platforms. When they go, they kind of give cover to everybody else. Nobody else wants to be left out. They don't want to be singled out as the holdout, because if they're still providing support to the people that are being unpersoned, they become targets in the future. They're suspect. Their services could be attacked, and they could be disconnected by the rest of the network. I mean, these networks are completely interconnected. I mean, they offer services. I mean, they control the information flow for 3.5 billion people, and Facebook, for all its decline here, is still growing at 200,000 people a day. So it's like still getting big, and these services span everything. I mean, they cover dating, they cover job search, they cover basic communications. So you can't really get anything done without doing this. You have a small business, you have to use Facebook and Google to kind of market your business in order to get the flow in, or Amazon to deliver your products using their distribution system. So you're relying on them, and if they disconnect you, they unperson you, you're done. You're dead in the water.
Yeah.
So the cascade is a little bit emergent, but I mean there's real reasons for engaging in it and joining it.
And what do you call it when the corporations and the government act in unison in a political way to silence political opponents and to squash political speech and to unperson people? Is there a word for that when the corporations and the government are working together hand in hand and violating human rights?
Yeah, I mean, in the classic definition of what makes a system work like this, it's the classic definition of fascism as a system, is that when government and corporations work together towards the same goal, and there isn't any overt competition. Everything's negotiated. They all have the same goal in sight. They all head in the same direction. And then there's a thing that Germany kind of invented in the early 30s called Gleichschaltung. It's a process of getting everybody in alignment. Every single organization, everybody who's employed at these companies or in the civil service, they all have to be focused on the same goal. And anyone who's outside of that Anyone who is in disagreement has to be disconnected. But that's this kind of networked fascism is different than the previous one, and it's pretty much become the model for the world. I mean, China is a fascist state in that regard, but the state is in charge, and they set the direction, and they keep all the corporations in line. Like you have Jack Ma, he stepped out, the CEO of Alibaba, and he's still been disappeared. Occasionally he pops up and he looks like he's in some kind of concentration camp somewhere or in isolation, looking haggard, and he just, all he did is say that the regulatory environment had to be loosened up a little bit so he could do more business. So, and then you have in the U.S. where it looks increasingly like the corporations are the dominant party, and they are controlling the direction, and that the government is actually the weaker, less dominant. They're a tag-along. All they really provide is cash, protection, and kind of application of military force in this regard, like a counterinsurgency, counterterrorism force. So the corporations are kind of setting the agenda. They're in control. They're bringing us, in the direction that makes them the most money, and gives them the most success, which is kind of perpetuation of their kind of strip mining of our data to build AIs that become the most valuable products in the world.
I wonder if they really are focused on making money. I think that they're focused on power right now. And I think from what I've observed of the Project Veritas videos from Google and some of the things that these leaders have said, I know that their alignment with the race folks and BLM and such, there is a cynical money-making ploy to that for sure. But I do believe that these leaders, the products of our university system and the other institutions that have delivered CRT as gospel, as religion, I do believe that these people have taken that to heart. They believe it sincerely, and I think that they believe that they're on a moral crusade. So from my perspective, I see a moral crusade leading a corporate government fusion where the corporations are in more power. They're the ones leading the government along. And this is the classic definition of fascism, and it is also the 21st century version we're looking at when it comes to the networked element and the technology component. And so I just kind of want to let people settle with that for just 1 second. I mean, this is not hyperbole. This is not wild conspiracy. This is something that you can observe on a day-to-day basis. The most powerful corporations, which are now the most powerful entities in the world, acting in unison with the United States government and others to enact a political agenda, curtail human rights, to unperson people, to exile people, and to take control of our entire information space, which is where we are now. We're in the information space. And so I think you use the term network dominance. Can you explain a little bit about what that means? And how we can observe that phenomenon in our circumstances today.
Oh wow! Well, they control everything. where we make our money and how we run our small business and how we operate as individuals. And they're controlling the politics. One thing we're not going to see is a lot of regulation going after them, because there's a kind of a tacit agreement now between the Biden administration and the people in power right now. And the networking companies that, they will be free of regulation as long as they keep Trump off, right? All they have to do is say, okay, regulate us. We'll let Trump come back on. We'll start reconnecting all these folks, and they would go nuts. They have no means of, the government has no means of doing that themselves, and they're kind of beholden to them. Also, it was kind of a demonstration to all the politicians in Washington that if you go against these companies, you're hosed. Right? They could just tweak the algorithms to make sure that the outcome occurs in the way that's disadvantageous to you getting into office again. No one really wants to cross them. I think Elizabeth Warren ran into this when she took on Facebook during the primaries. And as soon as she started going after them, her numbers went way down. These companies, now that they're in control of politics, they have to find a new source of legitimacy, right? Kind of exercise this level of control without having people go after them, violently. So they have to find new sources of ways of kind of giving them the legitimacy to do it, to take these measures, to exercise control over politics, not only here but all over the world. They're already doing it. They're intervening in political systems all over the world right now. Plenty of examples of that. So there's a couple. I identified 3 sources that they're using. One is this, network tribes are latching on to BLM and others, and they're taking that message, and that appeals to their employees who are largely in alignment with the tribal messages, and they are using that as a way to gain legitimacy. Another one is aligning with the government's counterterrorism, counterinsurgency campaign against everyone associated with the right, and hardcore Trump supporters, QAnon, that and the like. And so as they'll help them find those folks, make the network connections, and then suppress them or target them. That gives them a certain amount of legitimacy as a kind of protective force for the country. And the third one is a little bit more of an outlier, but maybe it's a longer term and something that applies outside of the United States immediately, is this kind of global justice. Kind of the stuff that's coming out of Davos, the Great Reset, where corporations alone are the ones that's going to save us from the environmental catastrophe headed our way. And that if corporations are excused for doing almost anything, manipulating politics, manipulating popular perception, changing social dynamics, limiting discussions on what's to be done about the environmental crisis, because they have to do this. They're the only ones that can pull this off. And that gives them with a huge number of people, a lot of legitimacy. You can see even with this is that just with the disconnections they did in January, they're getting a lot of applause and cover. People are violently in favor of this. If you say, hey, wait a second, this is not good for us longer term, wiping out dissent and wiping out discussion, like with the COVID stuff today, it's like if you say that it was man-made or manufactured, because the WHO panel came back and said it wasn't, that it was naturally evolving, you will be disconnected. You will be censored by the social networks. Facebook announced that they would do that. So any kind of contrary narrative now is being censored out, down to the conversational level. If so many people are in favor of this, they're just like cheering it on. Like as long as they do what we're in favor of, they can continue expanding and continuing to kind of lock things down. So that's what I meant by dominance.
Network dominance, political dominance. They have legitimacy in the eyes of the folks on the left. In fact, not only do they have legitimacy, but these folks on the left are suffering from the same post-Westphalian sort of circumstances that we all are. They too have lost a little bit of faith in the government, and now they're looking towards the corporations as their saviors for the environment and for political dissent and for being uncomfortable, for being challenged, for even having anybody ask a single question that challenges your beliefs or your perceptions or facts, or asserts a fact that runs contrary to your narrative. And I went back to the network dominance thing just so we could just lay it all out, just so that we can get this full context. They control all the pipes and everything. They control the government. They're aligned with the political network, the uniparty. It's not the Democrats. It's not the Republicans. It's both of them acting together. Trump was the outlier. Trump was the insurgent, although that word is now so tainted. Right. I feel weird using it now, even though we've been using it for years leading up to this. And so now the corporate rule is being welcomed. It's being welcomed by people on the left who think for some reason, at the end of the day, the corporations are going to really take care of them, even as they're really putting it to these other people over here. And to me, that seems a little bit naive. And I don't think that we're on our way. I don't think that we're on our way to any place good with that. And so this is the context for January 6th, right? This is the context for January 6th. And for context for people, I have spent a lot of time on the streets in DC. I've lived here for a number of years. I have been on the streets for Antifa protests, Black Lives Matter riots. I was there on the end of May when the most riots and all the damage to DC went down. You know, arson, felonies, assaults, all kinds of destruction. And so I've been observing what's going on. And I was down there on January 6th. And I went to Trump's speech. And I listened to the speech, which was pretty tame, I thought. It didn't really get me pumped up like I was hoping. It didn't even feel like a rally speech. And he urged people to go down to the Capitol and to give him hell and to protest. I don't think that he urged anybody to enter the Capitol to actually fight. But he did urge them to go down there. And after the speech, I started walking down in that direction, and I could just feel in the air things were different. The energy was different that day. The vibes were different. There were people in the street that I hadn't seen before. There were huge groups of people in the streets that I hadn't seen before. There were guys all dressed in black with black sweatshirts and hoods that were not Antifa, walking down the street chanting F Antifa, F Antifa. The Proud Boys were out in force. There were people carrying football-sized American flags down the street chanting "Whose streets? Our streets." And as I started making my way over to the Capitol, I just had a bad feeling, man. I had a bad feeling. And I was starting to get reports, hey, there's a full-on riot. I saw Elijah Schaefer down there, and he was taking, doing filming. And it just was like, I can't go down there. So I went home, thankfully, and I observed what happened. Who knows what the facts and the details are? It's really irrelevant. The facts and the details of what occurred on January 6th, irrelevant. In fact, facts and details seemingly more and more irrelevant every day. What is relevant is that January 6th is being used as a catalyst. It is a catalyst for this dominant structure, this network structure that now has legitimacy to just go full force, whole hog, all the way in, all the chips in. What do you see, John, as the biggest consequences or fallout from January 6th? How are they going to use it? How did it affect the trajectory of things? And what can we expect from your perspective coming out of the uniparty corporate race alliance in 2021 and the next few years here? What do you see happening?
Well, first, apologies to everyone. I had a leak in my shower. It's the only time I could get the plumber in before the snowstorm hit, and it's like right during the show. He wasn't even supposed to turn up during this hour, but
no sweat, man. This is NBC, and that's why people are here.
Real life, real life intrudes. Okay, so first of all, that Capitol event proves that the right and left, they don't have symmetric kind of considerations, right? There's no symmetry. They're asymmetric. The right is, more disruptive, and that disruptive, as long as it doesn't get violent, is accepted. It's a maneuver warfare. It's going from, one topic to the next, disrupt. As long as it stays peaceful, it's okay. The left, the tribes on the left, they use a moral framework, and that moral warfare works on a different basis. And so if there is violence, it's morally justified violence for the most part. And the anti-racist stuff fed into, providing the moral legitimacy for all the riots that occurred. So the folks on the right who thought that they could get away with that didn't know that they were fighting a different type of warfare, kind of online warfare that I was talking about. So what does this event do is that all of the warnings from the counterterrorism, counter-extremist establishment in DC and around the US, around the world, have been focused on right-wing terrorism and right-wing extremism, and it was mostly just guys popping off here and there over the course of 4 years. And in general, the death toll from right-wing extremism has been falling since 2015-16. It's been in decline. It's at the lowest level it's been in a decade. But that didn't stop people from making the claims that this is like this monster that's out there that's about to get everybody, and they didn't have the violence to kind of demonstrate that that was true. This establishment.
We love dogs on the Jack Murphy Live show. It ain't nothing.
Yeah, this establishment, has been operating, counterinsurgency operations and around the world for, decades. Okay, these are wars, foreign wars that never stop, but they were being wound down. And even though we're still in Afghanistan and Iraq, they were still on the way down, and they needed a new target. And the new target was this kind of right-wing extremism, and they started jumping in. I'm out of the counterterrorism, counterinsurgency world, and I did the tier 1 counterterrorism kind of ops for years, 5 years, and it's always geared to finding the target, and the target was this domestic insurgency. So the Capitol event provided the demonstration that this group was extremely violent and that they could not be tolerated, and that lots and lots of attacks would occur in the future. And that's caused the response to be kind of way over the top. I mean, we have this occupying force of 25,000 National Guard troops in D.C., and they've turned the whole downtown Capitol area and the White House into kind of a replica of the Baghdad's Green Zone. With this permanent fencing and this permanent troop presence and these permanent kind of ID and credential checks and rapid response to anything that occurs outside of that fence, it kind of points the direction that this is going. This was all ready to go, and this event just gave it the impetus to just jump in. So that's where we're at right now on the government side. I mean, the hollow United States. Wow, it's a sight to behold. All it really can do right now is apply violence. The military is intact, and they can't do any programs of any sort that make any sense. All they're doing really is just giving away money, lots and lots of money. Not only the COVID relief, they're just throwing money at stuff. The child tax credit that used to be tied to offsetting taxes that you paid, they're going to eliminate the floor on that, so it turns into just a cash giveaway. So, if you make zero money and have 6 kids now, you'll make $12,000 a year from the government for that. So, just throwing cash, no rhyme or reason to doing what they're doing. The cash is flowing, or the $50,000, write-off to student loans. I mean, I wouldn't mind a write-off to student loans if they corrected the problem that created it in the first place. But then it's not even in thinking that they would even address that. What went wrong in the program in order to create that kind of mess, create $1 trillion hole? And there's got to be something wrong with it. I mean, maybe it was funding the wrong degrees, or maybe it was, they gave too much debt that caused the prices to go up, but they won't even look at just throwing cash. So that's all this hollow government could do is like crack down or throw cash. So that's where we're at right now, and it's kind of in a dire circumstance. It's not so.
It's crazy to me to see the fusion of the MMT theorists and the UBI guys and the student loan folks, and the only weapon they have is the printing press. That's it. That's like the only thing that they have, as you said. They got to print money and throw money at a problem without fixing any problems. Although I do chuckle at the idea that somehow the government is going to figure out a way to get $50,000 in student loan relief when they can't even manage to push out $2,000 for people during Corona. The student loan stuff is even stickier and messier than that because of a cascade of defaults and the insurance that will have to take place. There'll be a SNL bailout style bailout, and it'll take a decade for that to work out. So, guys, if you're in the finance industry and you see the writing on the wall for the student loans, go out there and open up your like SNL type workout shops, because that will be a lucrative business. That'll be a lucrative business for a long time. Another thing that you said that I found really fascinating here is the hollow United States, and that's absolutely true. We just talked about the money. The other thing that they have is the military, and then you have to think about the most immediate military history to give them to give the proper perspective, to understand what kind of hammer that they have and what kind of nails do they see, right? So the military has been involved. The military has been involved in Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 20 years, and they have been an occupying force trying to establish their will, their moral framework, laws, regulations, culture, customs, etc. A moral crusade, as it were, to win the hearts and minds through bombs and death and killing and occupation in Iraq. And so what they learned there over time was how to conduct a counterinsurgency, establish their dominant, occupying force, and then fight a counterinsurgency bubbling up. So they have been training and working on and looking at and focusing on how do we exist as an occupying force on a moral crusade, and how do we stop all of the people in that country who oppose what we're doing. And it's kind of scary, the things that they have learned what to do, the way that they've learned to not just drop bombs everywhere, but to do targeted assassinations and network disruptions and infiltration and such. And now they're going to take that whole perspective, the whole playbook, they're going to turn it to the United States and they're going to point it at right-wing extremists. And of course, you're a right-wing extremist is if someone on the left says you are. Doesn't matter if you really are or not. And now the war on drugs is turned into the war on terror. It is now going to turn into the war on, what did you call it, John?
Extremism.
War on extremism. And so I had a follow-up tweet to that where I was, sort of graveyard joking, where and how is the easiest forever war? We're all into forever wars here, right? So right. Where's the easiest forever war? Right here at home. Right here at home. So the forever war is coming. And when you look at hopefully not, but when you look at all of the structural elements that are in place, right? The networks that we've talked about, the alliances we've talked about, the hollowing out of the government, leaving them only with violence and money, right? The moral crusade that the left is on, the January 6th events, the military security apparatus that's been training for 20 years in the Mideast now to conduct very similar operations here in the United States, in our propensity for the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on extremism. It all adds up in a circumstance in which these predictions don't seem to be outlandish and don't seem to be sort of low probability of what's happening. So
it's just that, I wrote a report, 2 years ago that said if the right has a fork, meaning that there's a section of the, Trump insurgency that ends up conducting some violence, that would be used as a trigger for a domestic counterinsurgency. It would just trigger it all. And you can see it when it comes in, it actually erupts, and it just, they turn this counterinsurgency, counterterrorism meat grinder, and they focus it on U.S. citizens. And they do their kind of surveillance, the Patriot Act 2.0. They dig down, they look at the network analysis thing. If this person has said this, you can then connect them to all the other people in their network that now are suspect, now put on lists, they're watched, they're monitored. And then you start throwing in the kind of, tribal left stuff, and you're looking for signs of fascism and white supremacy and patriarchy kind of stuff that would be not allowed, would be an indicator that you are an enemy of the state, and that your door could be knocked in at the in the middle of the night, and they would do those renditions and things like that could end up happening to a lot of these folks as this accelerates. So, it's the funny thing, not the funny thing, the terrible thing about this is that once you start doing that, American right wing has always been kind of had these militias and other things like that, is that they never really go anywhere because, there isn't ever this crackdown that they always anticipate, right? And you get this real crackdown, and they, people are, it's really happening, and you actually see it, and it's sweeping the country. All of a sudden they're mobilized, they're actually in play. And you create, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You create the thing that you're trying to suppress. This is proof that the crackdown that they were anticipating is happening. Those black helicopters are coming. I mean, there are black helicopters, but they actually have them come. And you get the thing that you don't want, and it turns into an ugly mess that lasts years. And every year they'll say, like they did with Afghanistan and Iraq, next year will be better. We've almost got to the turning point. Give us a few more few more powers, some more troops, and we can pull this off.
If there is a glimmer of hope, it's that weren't successful in Afghanistan, were we? So maybe.
No, they're ginning it back up again. So Trump was trying to draw it down, and they're saying, wait a second, we're not ready to go yet. We're going to slow this down. Maybe we're going to add some more troops and do, keep this thing going. It's always like every year. Next year will be better. Just have to wait it out. This, counterinsurgency takes time. It just doesn't pan out. Nation building doesn't work.
This was festering in the Trump administration. Christopher Wray continued to point out that the, quote, white extremist was the biggest threat that we faced in the United States, despite the fact that the extremist deaths from the right had declined every year underneath Trump, which is a funny thing, right? He got elected and white extremist violence declined in that time frame. So this has been there. They've been waiting for this opportunity, but enough with the doom and gloom, John. There are no black pills around here, guys. We are not just simply going to sit around and just mope about the circumstances. We're actually men of action. Actually, no, we are men of action. me and my guys in the Liminal Order, we're men of action. We are not sitting around just moping about this stuff. It's good to talk about. It's great to understand the context. It's important so that everybody knows what we're living through. But the truth is like we have to take action and do something. So, right. In your mind, John, let's start with culturally speaking. Like, what can we do to start pushing back? What can we do to start improving our own lives? What can we do as a positive step to move forward in this environment so that we can protect ourselves, we can protect our families, we can protect our communities, and hopefully we can protect the nation, because that's what we want to do. That's what men of action want to do. We build America in times of peace, defend her in times of war, and we want to build this thing right now. So what do you see, John? Like, right. Let's give people some hope here. How do we move forward? What do we do? We got a number of things we can talk about, but what's the first thing that comes to mind?
One thing that's really high on my priority list is get behind a kind of a digital rights. Okay, so we have this kind of digital personhood. And right now it has no rights. The rights you have offline don't apply to when you get online. You don't have any rights of access or any kind of rights of speech. You don't have any ownership of any of the data that you produce, or that's being collected on you. Basically, you're a serf. You're nothing. You have no consideration. And so what we can do is get behind a rights movement that defines what freedom of speech is and what your rights of access are, and your responsibilities associated with that attached to your identity. So at least you have a home there. So you can't be unpersoned and disconnected from all the services that are out there, unless you have to really do incredibly horrific stuff to fall outside of to have that happen. But not this willy-nilly stuff that's unpersoning people right now.
So when you say a digital bill of rights,
right?
This is a way to define the rights that you have in the new information space. We defined rights in the 1700s for ourselves. Agrarian society, the Wild West, wide open spaces, homesteaders everywhere. Explorers, adventurers, and stuff. And that was the way that the environment in which our rights were defined at that time. We now need to define our digital rights because we exist in a new space.
Right.
Right? We exist in a new space that's online, where you have an avatar. You have a representation of yourself that's online, that produces value through data. Right, the data that we produce when you use a free service, everybody knows this by now, but Google or Facebook or Gmail or whatever it is, you are the product, right? You're selling your personal data to these companies in exchange for ease of access to information.
Right.
And we can get into how you capture that in a minute, but the question that I always have, John, when we talk about this is, it sounds great on paper, man, right? Like, I get it, I want it. But like, the tools by which we have to implement this is like the gatekeepers. Like, they're the ones that are holding us out already. How do we get a digital bill of rights enacted when the government is in alliance with the corporations that believe that they're on a moral crusade and have a higher authority?
Right. Well, I mean, it's always been a race, and this is what I've been writing about for years. Can we stabilize the system before it locks down and goes into kind of this long night scenario? I think there's still some play in the political environment if maybe the Republicans and Democrats that are willing join behind a rights initiative. There are people on the progressive left that are going to be wiped out because they're pushing taxes and that kind of stuff, and they're not going to be kind of considered fully equal to the establishment players. And getting rights is something I think we can get a broad-based kind of coalition going. It could be the kind of thing that provides a kind of way of reformatting the Republican Party. Because I mean, unless there's rights online, unless you have digital rights, there's no Republican Party. It doesn't exist. It's all of this bunch of individuals that are going to be wiped out if they start to gain any kind of prominence. So you have to have those rights, and I think that could actually, I think that has legs, and I think that could actually be foisted upon onto the networks, and it would be something that other countries, once you do that, will copy. If it's clean, if it's simple, if we could make it an internet standard, like HTML is a kind of an internet standard that's like never changing. It has a few changes every once in a while, but it's pretty much static. The protocol is pretty much static. It hasn't really changed much. It takes forever to change. The same thing here is if we can make these rights a basic building block of services, then things can change, not just for us, but we can give it as a gift to the world. And I think that's going to be a good thing. And there's ways of doing that. It's just like, but I think it has to probably go through the political process in order to make it happen.
I wish I was as optimistic about that. I mean, one of the big issues is nobody on Congress has any idea what's really happening with technology.
Right.
You can just see it in the questions. You can see it in the responses to the answers in the congressional hearings. You can see it in the failure to act. They had 4 years. They had 2 years even where they had the House, or they had they had power, they had control, they could get things done, but they didn't. They didn't because people don't really understand. It reminds me of my old days in finance when you knew that the way to make money was to operate in an asset space where like your bosses didn't know anything about it. And you could just because products evolve so quickly, so you're operating in a new asset space, you can get away with murder because nobody even knows what you're doing. And I feel like the corporations are acting in that space right now where the people just don't know, and the citizens certainly don't know. There's only a handful of us that actually do know and are sounding the alarm on it. I wish I could see this happening. I don't, unfortunately, see the political will for it. But I think one thing you said is absolutely right. Like, this should be the central plank of the GOP, like, period, full stop.
Right.
Like, this is like probably the most important thing that they could do. Even more important than immigration, even more important than the deficit, even more important than, I hate to say it, it might be even more important than ending our expansionary wars and the empire and stuff. Getting this issue defined and enshrined is that important, because if we don't, as you said, we're going to be serfs. We're serfs on the Lord's land, the information space, with no rights and no ability to grow, to invest. I'm putting up YouTube videos and building a channel here, knowing it's probably futile, right? Knowing that one day it's all going to go away. So, guys, if you're listening, go to Liminal Order, sign up for the list. Go to jackmurphylive.com, sign up for the list there. Get in contact with me in every which way possible, because one day this is going to go, and we know that. But for most people, investing in a circumstance in which you don't have the rights, you don't own your data, you're a serf. That it's a uncertainty. Yeah, uncertainty is the kryptonite to investment, and so it is certainly something that we need to do. I don't have too much hope that it is going to happen. So let's forget about that for 1 second. Like, these grand ideas, the solution that could solve all the problems. What do we do in the meantime? Because people give me crap try not to swear on the channel anymore. People are giving me crap because, I was like against the January 6th thing. I was very disappointed and upset that happened. I was against QAnon. I was against that kind of action. People are like, well, what are you going to do? You just talk. All you do is talk. Da, 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 da. Absolutely not, guys. There's got to be a whole portfolio of things that we do. One of them is a digital bill of rights. We're going to talk about a couple of other things too. But in that same portfolio is what can we do on an individual and a community basis, right? Like we have to build anyway. Even if we get the digital bill of rights, if we don't, even if the conflict gets worse or it doesn't, we still need to build. Have you been giving any thought to that? I think I saw in the workspace on your Patreon for next month's issue. I think you made a pretty clear statement about that. Where are you right now on community and space and sovereignty in this environment?
Oh well, at the very micro level, at the individual level, definitely you have to build communities, build online spaces that are more resilient than just having an account on the big services. I mean, granted, we have to fight for a place on the big services, a permanent place, permanent access, because that's where the world is, right? You can't just totally withdraw from it, but you can hedge yourself and protect yourself by connecting with communities that have an online and offline presence, that have invested in different technologies that allow you some level of protection against being unpersoned or disconnected. Also, one thing I found by talking about sensitive topics for 20 years is that, you have to be more circumspect with your language, and you have to, say certain things, and you got to know what you're saying. This is like living in the Eastern Bloc. If I talk to all my friends who have come from Eastern European countries, they go, you just have to learn how to live with restrictions. You have to learn what you can say and what you can't say, and what gets you in trouble and what doesn't.
But this isn't a new phenomenon, actually. I mean,
oh yeah, but it's accelerated. It's being automated. Right. I mean, the difference between now and previously is that all of these restrictions are now being taught to AIs, and the AIs watch your conversations on any of these platforms, and they're interlinked. And because if you end up on a list, that list ends up being shared with other platforms, and they all act in concert. This automation of this repression is what really makes this different. I mean, you could have a huge bureaucracy of censors, thousands of people who are looking at every bit of communication, but they can only really do stuff at that top level, and maybe occasionally people who stand out. This, with AIs, they can go down to every single conversation. So then there's different insurgencies.
I just want to point out something on that one subject. Philosophers have known for all eternity that language is dangerous, and that the politicians don't like it when they speak clearly and plainly. There's a whole strain of writing, esoteric writing, which meant to get around this very problem, where you're putting out ideas into the universe that are going to be opposed by the powers that be, but yet they need to get out there. And I think that's built into us. I think we can find ways around that particular thing. But I do want to ask you one question about the AI. I have faith in human ingenuity. I have faith in human adaptability. I have faith in our OODA loop, as it were. I have faith in the fact that we can focus on OODA-ing the OODA, like focusing on iteration. Right. To steal a phrase from that was from Jordan, I think. Jordan Hall gave me that one. Do you think? Here's a total side note. Do you think that the human brain can out OODA the power of a AI sensor one day, or is it going to be? Is that a fight we can't win?
Longer term, I don't think so. I mean, look at this whole fight is over who gets to set the limits and the controls into these AIs, right? Because they're going to be an AI that, and hundreds of them, but they're huge and they're massive, and they're sitting between all of us. They're mitigating our conversations. They're accelerating them. They're dampening them. They're giving us opportunities or taking them away. And we can, this fight that we're having now, even though people don't really kind of know this, is really over what that will look like. what kind of opportunities are available and to whom, and how are they presented, and what you can do in your life and what you can't. And if we can get it right, yeah, it could be an amazing thing. It's like getting the government right, in terms of rights and responsibilities. If you get that right formula, it's an incredibly dynamic thing. And I think, I mean, I'm optimistic that we'll work this out. That there's gonna be some kind of realization that we have to, do something about this online space, and we'll start with some kind of rights and some kind of, control at the individual level that will, limit the companies.
So in response to these events, we have taken action in the Liminal Order, and we have come together. We have formed a deliberate community. We have put up a barrier, which is sort of antithetical to like the entire energy of the last 30 years, right? Indiscriminate connections was the whole spirit of the last few decades. And now we're strategically disconnecting on purpose. We're intentionally disconnecting and creating intentional communities with intentional technology that is outside the purview, right now at least, of the AIs, which is outside of the purview of the sensors, real secure private comms. End-to-end encrypted, every single message end-to-end encrypted on a private network that can only be accessed by people that have been vetted and given permission to join. And then if you get the network big enough, then you can find work opportunities and financing opportunities and build new companies, which we're doing inside the LO. We have incubated businesses from a chat message through to full release within this network, because we've engaged our sense of build and create, and we understand this environment that we live in, and we're being very intentional about it. And the LO is not only just an intentional community, but it's sort of like a tech startup. We are trying to solve this problem. We have some of the great thinkers, futurists, technologists, people who understand what's happening, and we are trying to solve this problem of how can we continue to communicate, and not only just communicate, but people pithily dismiss. The libertarians say, build your own internet, right? There's some truth to that. And there, in time, that will be a thing. Being able to build a network like that will be possible. And so we're looking at that. We're trying to figure out how can we create a system of communication that's untraceable, that is not tied to anything, is decentralized, that is private and secure, and whose only risk factor is if the internet goes down. And I'm not going to share it right now, but I think that we've actually come up with something. And so we are working on all these kind of things, and we're trying to capture the energy of our community. And if the community gets big enough, you can then begin to monetize everybody's actions, intentions, views, preferences, etc., in a way very much as you've always described here, John, where you own your data, you get value for your contribution to the network. Right. And then through blockchain technology, I think, or smart contracts or other things, you can get paid directly, in alignment with the energy or the effort or the data that you've provided. If you get your community big enough, then it's like a fire hose, and you can actually develop these alternative systems, I believe. And that's what we're working on in the Liminal Order, liminal-order.com. Come check us out. What is go ahead, John.
No, you're right. These network tribes can become really successful if they increase or maximize, optimize the opportunities for that kind of digital self, because they're not, geographically localized often, right? You're not living next to the person that's in your tribe. But if this tribe, if this group, if this network increases the value of your digital self, grows it fast, that includes, the numbers in your bank account, and the numbers of people you're connected to, and the opportunities they present, and the protections that are provided you, and the kind of group action that can come about whenever you need some help. That's amazing, but it's all done in this kind of digital self, right? This digital person, that kind of mirror of you. And if that thing is growing and getting bigger and getting more powerful and getting more valuable, and it's making money on Sundays, I always love the idea that you produce stuff and it's making money on Sundays even when you're taking time off, right? I mean, if that thing's getting more valuable as a result of your membership in this group, then it is probably the best thing you could possibly get involved with. It's a difficult environment, and certainly the corporations aren't doing that for you. They're just strip mining you. They're taking everything away from you. They're building the most valuable products on the globe with these 3 billion person AIs, right? That are everyone's feeding data into them, and the more data it has, the more valuable they get. And we're doing it willingly. We're letting ourselves, like, that digital person is becoming diminished and less. We don't have any ownership. It's like working the land for the feudal lord, right? As a serf, you don't own the land. Only lords can own land, right? And you're working, and you have to provide a certain amount of product that goes to the lord that they can sell, that they can use, and you don't do any more work than you absolutely necessarily have to do, because there's no way to buy anything or expand or do anything except at the whatever the Lord allows you. So we're in that same kind of space digitally, and until that happens, until they start to clean up their active, maybe they'll never do that. We have to do this in the small community. The good thing about all this crackdown effort, is really waking people up to the idea that they don't have a future online in the big networks, unless they change, right? So it's got people looking at ways to, make those big changes, but it's also gotten people to move off into other communities and try to build something on their own, with them. And there are a lot of people like you are like out there trying to do this. And so if it grows that digital self, that good digital person, that's, digital you, it's a good thing. It's going to be a powerful thing to have in your life.
It strikes me that this is, well, thank you, and I agree, and I think is the best thing that anyone can do at this point in time is get with us or somebody else similar, although there's not very many other people like us out there, guys. It seems to me that there needs to be a revolution. I'm not calling for revolution, anybody. A metaphorical revolution here, where the power to the people. I mean, it's trite and it's old, but it's true. We none of us have the power because we don't own ourselves online. Well, not only do we not own ourselves, we have willingly given it away, right? We have just walked in and just dumped it all out there and given all of ourselves away to everybody. And it's incredible. It's hard to even understand like what value they are getting from us. It's got to be immense, just immense, because of the services that they provide for free, etc. They're doing it for a reason, and it's not a good one. It's not a good one for us. So protecting the digital self, a digital bill of rights, intentional communities. I also would like to add to this, a return to more face-to-face, a return to nature, a return to the earth, a return to self-sustenance, and a return to, I've been using the phrase, resettle the American frontier. There's so much space still in the United States where you could go and set up a homestead and still be connected to the networks and still that you want to be. And you can build an intentional community that way. And no longer am I thinking about getting, quote, off the grid. I want to get off the grids I want off of and be on the grids that I want to be on. And I bring this up because it's a parallel to homesteading in the old school sense of being on the land, being resourceful, and taking the materials that are around you, adding your human ingenuity, and creating and building something of value that can sustain you independent of anything else. That is a huge skill. There is a parallel in the information space. There is so much money to be made out there in the information space. There are hills filled with money out there in the information space. Get out in the information space and become an info homesteader yourself. Find ways to generate income and create networks that benefit you and communities that benefit you out there in the e-space, because it's just as valuable. And I don't want to give that up. I want to be on the networks I want on, off the networks I want off of, and able to sustain myself in an independent way. Because as you said, the government is hollowed out. We know that they're in alignment with the corporations that are strip mining us.
Right.
And if we don't do that, they're going to strip mine us all the way down to being batteries hooked up to feed the AIs after the nuclear winter comes. You think that that sounds crazy? I saw it in a movie once, but effectively that's what they're doing right now.
Data batteries.
Yeah, we're data batteries, and there's so much great information that we've talked about before about even like student data. Like imagine your kids, right? They go to school, and then the companies that make textbooks and whatever, they get all of your student data, they analyze your student data, they use it to create new products, sell more services. They're taking advantage of your kids even when they're in kindergarten. Like you don't even have to watch TV or have a cell phone or be on social media or producing stuff out there or using Gmail. Just by virtue of going to school, your personal data is used to fuel profits for corporations. And I don't know if people even understand that. It would be one hell of a revolution if we were able to get, if your social security number acted in a way that was like your own wallet. And for every piece of data you put out there, you got money back in return. I mean, that would be phenomenal. And that is congruent with our American values. Right?
Yeah. Your resilience stuff is, I mean, I used to do resilience since 2008 or 9, maybe 2010. I had a resilience newsletter, how do you turn your home into a source of profit making, and how to foodscape your yard, and how to put in pellet stoves or incrementally put in solar that doesn't cost a bundle. And it was all about connecting to the networks on your own terms, right? You don't want to like totally disconnect because it's too damn expensive to do that. Try to replicate everything you're going to get. You get very inexpensively online or through service connections. It was just an adjunct. So when those things went down, you weren't completely shut down, right? So I have like a whole house generator using natural gas. I have pellet stoves. I can run off a small electrical generator. I have gas stove. I mean, it all works, and keep the house warm, and even when things disconnect. That may be kind of important if this ends up becoming a real insurgency, or we see a real insurgency out there as they crack down. Because one thing I've been writing about forever, since like back 2003, is that modern insurgency in modern countries isn't about as much committing standard acts of violence. It's about disruption, system disruption, because sabotage in the old environment was like you have the system that breaks and is inconvenient. In the modern environment, we have system after system stacked on each other, and they're all interconnected. They're tightly coupled. So one thing happens in one section of the network, it's reflected and damaged in the other side. And if you break things, so you break the right node, what I call the system point, the point on the network that's the most vulnerable and the most important, it'll cause a cascade of failure that goes from one network to the next. And insurgents operating in this kind of environment, if we create them, if we're stupid enough to create them, will break those systems. They will go one into another. So we saw that a little bit in Nashville. I mean, just a tiny one. It wasn't even like, it was just one node, and it took out telephone and communications, across the state, across the region. Insurgents did this in Iraq. They did it in 2007. Remember when oil went up to $147 a barrel? That was insurgents doing systems disruption in Nigeria and Iraq. They were breaking systems. They took 2 million barrels of oil off the market every day, and 2 million barrels were the swing capacity in the system, and the price just went up, and that's what crashed the economy. They initiated the crash. So system disruption works even in developing countries. It would work even better here, and it would be a terrible thing to happen, where everything's breaking down on an ongoing basis, and you have to produce a lot more on your own. One good thing about the whole COVID thing, at least if you have the luxury of actually being able to disconnect, or not disconnect, but to work remotely. One thing we saw in the surveys of people who are working remotely is they save that 2 hours of commute every day. They don't have to, deal with a lot of the office politics. It's like, their lives have actually improved, and they're reporting that their lives have actually improved during this time. If you can work remotely, you can live anywhere. A lot of companies are signing that and making that policy now, and that if you can work anywhere, then you work in some place that's less expensive, that gives you more land, that gives you more resources, that's maybe a tighter community that you can fold into better. You're not kind of tethered to that kind of close to the city location that's expensive, that where the taxes are through the roof, that are killing you every day. It gives you a lot of more flexibility in terms of finding places that afford you this resilience. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of resilient communities out there, and you kind of have this vision of this group of people that are living, the way you think they should live, but finding a group of people like that is really tough. It's not, it's not as easy as it sounds. It's you have to have a lot of similarities and core dynamics in place to make a community like that work, and that's hard to build online. So
it is, but we're trying, John.
I mean, yeah, you can find a homestead. You can find places like you could build with a group like yours. That you could retreat to in case there's a need to do that. That could be productive in case things shut down. Pool resources, put stuff like that together, so you can use it as a temporary thing. Again, it's like connect on your own terms and use it as a backup. And when the things are working great, we can go off into the system and connect and load up and take advantage of the whole systems. What everything is offered to you. And but when things are bad, there's a place to go.
A homestead is the new college degree. That's what I think. It is a essential element to a secure lifestyle and livelihood, for the exact reason that you said, is that you can engage in the network at large as long as it's going well and everything's okay. But the minute that they shut you down and cut you off, you're not dead.
Right.
You're still alive.
Right.
You're still alive. I mean, I remember when the guys in LA were violating Corona and the mayor turned off the water to their house. It's like, whoa, dude, that's a vulnerability that you don't ever really think about. I live in the city right now and I'm trying to get the hell out of here, and I'm on my way. But they could turn off the power. They can turn off the electricity. They can take away your driver's license. They can do all kinds of terrible stuff to you. You have to have a place to retreat to. Interestingly enough, too, it's just fascinating how it appears, though, that the gentrification trend starting in the the destruction of the cities in the late 60s and the hollowing out, and then the gentrification process that started again in the early or late 80s and 90s, that's done. Right? Like tectonic forces in real estate are at work, and I think we've seen a shift that we're going to have a new long-term trends in real estate. You can see it in the price of rural land and farmland. You can see it in declining rents in various cities and such. I drive around DC, man, it's dead. It's empty. Things are dead, boarded up. Not everywhere, but there's a lot of closed shops. There's a lot of things that didn't survive. The city to me is over. I've lived here 30 years. I loved it, and now I got to go. I got to get out of here.
Yeah, a lot of people are just to point in on the COVID stuff. This stuff isn't going away. Right?
COVID.
Right? Yeah, it's going to be kind of an eternal crisis. I mean, there's variants coming in, and if they had done the right thing, initially and just shut the borders like everybody else who beat this thing, shut the borders early, and then you stamp down on what got through, and then you're fine. But the business interests said no. Let's not do that. If you shut the borders you can actually live normally. 90% of the economic activity is actually, at the local level, at the state level, and that all could have continued, but it would have required of shutting those borders down. And now we're in this crisis where those borders aren't being shut down again as these new variants come through, and they're more aggressive, and they may target different segments of the population, or not target, but have effects on different segments of the population, maybe kids next time, not just the 81-year-olds, and that's like constant crisis where we're always like, maybe the vaccine resistant ones will be coming this fall. But again, we're not disconnected enough in order to protect ourselves. And no one, I mean, nobody, all the way from the Trump side to the folks at the CDC or at the WHO or the Biden folks now, nobody said shut the borders. Everyone's like, but all the places that actually succeeded shut the borders. Like New Zealand and Taiwan and China and others who are doing well did that. So
that's xenophobic, John. That's xenophobic. It's racist. You can't shut down the borders and keep people out. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. So on one hand, the corporations will tell you that, but on the other hand, it's really about keeping their import-export flows going.
Well, it's a city killer, right? It's just like a constant city killer. I mean, How can you have a city where you're constantly, all the advantages of being in a city is because you're close to other people and you have all access to all these great venues and services and things like that. If you can't access all that stuff, what the hell are you living there for?
So right? I ask myself every day, John Robb.
Oh yeah, I have a son that lives in Brooklyn, right? So it's like incredible taxes. Like, why are you living there? You're in your apartment constantly anyway. You're not like going anywhere. I mean, and you can pay less if you go.
And get more elsewhere and be happier, safer, saner, and in a better environment, which is why the hills of Appalachia are calling me, John. We have spent a lot of time looking out there. We've narrowed down some areas, and I'm ready to set up my version of Appalachistan, where I can retreat to the hills, live in my version of the caves, and endure this occupying force until such time as we can come back into the light and find the American freedom spirit that is here. We're holding on to it. And it's not as bleak in the sense that there's nothing we can do. There are things that we can't control. This network stuff, I'm not involved in that. The AIs, I'm not involved in that. There's not much I can do there, but you can take care of yourself. And the thing that you have to do first off is, man, there has never been a time where taking care of your body, taking care of your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual state has been more important than it is right now. You must be fit. You must be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually sound, whether it's religion, meditation, outside time, community service, whatever it is. You have to get right with yourself, because we live in this information war. We live in this space where if you're not actively resisting the narratives that are putting in your head, the ideologies that are trying to acquire you as a carrier, if you're not actively resisting against them, you're going to fall victim. If you just go passive, you're a victim. You have to be proactive, take care of yourself, intentional about your communities, intentional about creating a toolbox for yourself to make sense of this world, perception and sense making and discernment, and being able to embody your values that you've identified. These are like the foundational toolkits or the hammer and nails of the 21st century, is to be able to take care of yourself and be personally sovereign and to choose the ideas that you have rather than have the ideas choose you. And then so you can also endure what might be happening. And so you can build in this environment, even though it's not necessarily conducive, because there's no giving up, John. There's no quitting. There's no rolling over. I'm not moving to Canada, which is worse anyway. That's a joke. I'm not moving. I'm not leaving. And I'm going to do everything that I can here for me and my children. And as they say in the Constitution, our posterity. I'm very interested in not turning over and doing what we can do. I think that this might be a good place for us to wrap, because we laid out where we are. We have an idea of where we're going. We have an idea of what we can do on a macro level, starting with just getting your digital ownership and protecting your digital self out there. And we've also discussed things that you can do on an individual and family and community level. And if there's one thing that is universal about the human spirit, is that we endure and we fight and we don't give up. I mean, if man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl, if that guy can find inspiration in his environment in a Nazi concentration camp, and he can find a way to stay healthy and stay motivated and to stay focused on his goal and endure what he endured. We can endure this right now. Maybe we'll get to having the same level of endurance there. But right now, we can do it. Just tap into the human spirit. You're never going to give up. You're never going to quit. You're going to be, you're going to have ingenuity. You're going to adapt. You're going to iterate. You just got to do it with the right people. So this is my wrap up here. You got to do it with the right people. You got to find people who share your values, who understand the landscape, who understand the framework that John has laid out here. By the way, who's been completely accurate every step of the way for a number of years now, people, starting back with his book, Brave New War. Check it out. Go to his Patreon, sign up. It's the best Patreon in existence, 100%. No doubt about that. Read his work and pay attention, because he sees the future and he knows where we're going. And I'm offering you ways that you can avoid the worst of what's coming, and that you can be proactive and you can build and create. Guys, we have to build and create. Build and create, and get with other people who understand that build and create is what we need to do, who share your values, such as folks in the Liminal Order, liminal-order.com. Please check it out. John, thank you so much for your time. As always,
Thanks, Jack.
You are always enlightening, sometimes terrifying, but certainly a pleasure to talk to. I value this relationship that we've formed over the years greatly. Your work has informed my work. I've taken your theories and other folks and put them into practice, and we've been doing it now for a couple of years, and we've really been growing beyond all expectations. And so thank you very much for me and all the guys in the LO, because we know what kind of an influence you've been on us. And I hope that for the audience at large here, John can be helpful for you as well too. So John, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on. This is
my pleasure.
Been a great relationship over the years.
It really has been, and I look forward to more of it in the future. And until then, sir, be well, and I will talk to you soon.
Right. Take care.
All right, Thanks. Good. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. All right, guys, that is it. We are wrapping up here on the Jack Murphy Live show. You can find me on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live. Please subscribe to the channel here on YouTube while it still exists. And if you're interested in common values, sharing common values with folks, and your values happen to be masculinity, sovereignty, and brotherhood, just like mine, come join us in the Liminal Order. It's an intentional community, and we're working very hard every day to combat all the things that we talked about here just now, and to build a future for ourselves that is meaningful, inspirational, safe, secure for us, for our family, for our communities, and hopefully one day as a model for the nation. So thank you very much for tuning in. Please share this, retweet it, send it out, sign up for the lists, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks very much.
Well, great. Thank you.